Good morning.
Morning.
We're here today to interview Virginia Caranci. Today is May the 5th, 2011. We're here in Virginia's beautiful home here on Main Street in Louisville. And we want to thank you very much, Virginia, for allowing us to come into your home and to capture some of Louisville's most important history for the Louisville Historical Museum.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, with that, let's begin with the early years of your life. When and where were you born?
I was born in 1931, October 27th, in Denver, Colorado.
Were you born at home or in a...
No, I was born in a hospital.
Okay. What hospital was that?
St. Luke's
St.
in
Louis.
Denver. Mm-hmm.
So have you lived in Louisville your entire life?
I've lived in Louisville since I was 8, but my grandparents and have always lived here, and my mother was born and raised here. When she married, she moved to Denver. My father died when I was 8, and we moved back to Louisville with my grandparents.
So what is your full name?
Virginia DeRose Caranci.
Do you have a middle name?
Yeah, Lee.
Okay. Were you named after a relative or a family friend?
No,
What is your ethnic background?
Italian, through and through.
Do you speak Italian?
No. We lived with my grandfather, and he felt like he would not speak. He came from Italy, but he would not speak Italian to me because he felt he was in the United States and we were to speak English.
Which was the way people felt.
Yeah,
back then.
it's too bad because I wish I knew a second language.
Right. So what was your father's full name?
My father was Louis DeRose.
And your mother?
Philomena Minnie DeRose. Jordanelli.
Jordanelli. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a question I have for later because I want to find out that relation with Jordanelli's here in town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you know how they met?
I don't know. My mother was a school teacher, and I don't know what my father was doing, working in his brother's grocery store. But how they met, I have no idea.
And was that brother's grocery store? What's the name of that grocery store?
It was Frank DeRose grocery store.
And was that in
It
Denver?
was in Denver on Tejon.
Okay. Did your parents immigrate here?
My parents didn't. My grandfather did.
Okay. Did your mother and father have a nickname?
No, they didn't. Well, my mother's name was Philomena, and they called her Minnie, but my father didn't. They just called him, they called him Louis.
So, if my memory serves me right, he passed away when you were 8?
I was 8. He was 37.
And so, he never lived in Louisville then. You and your mother moved to Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
With your,
And my brother.
okay. That's one of my questions I was coming up with. Were there any siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother who's living in Denver. His name is Richard Dick DeRose.
And how old is he?
Dick is 81.
So, he's older than you then?
He is.
Okay. And so, they live in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So, who were your grandparents on your father's side?
Angelina and Dominic DeRose.
And then on your mother's side?
Frank and Mary Jordanelli.
Did you have a special name for any of them?
No, I called them Grandma and Grandpa.
And so you did all of them immigrate to America then?
Yes,
And from what area?
from southern Italy.
What is the name of it?
My grandfather DeRose came from Naples, and my grandmother came from Potenza, and my grandpa and grandma Jordanelli both came from Potenza.
Do you think they knew each other back then, your grandmother and your grandparents?
No.
Your other grandparents? When coming to Louisville, did they know anyone here? What brought them here?
No. Well, I think it's interesting. My grandpa Jordanelli's father took his wife, and 3 sisters, and they came to mine, and they went to settle, and they settled in Marshall. And his father left he and his mother in Marshall and went back east with the girls, never to be seen or heard of again. So my grandfather had to go at 12 years old and work in the mine to support his mother. They lived in Marshall at that time. And then soon they moved to Louisville.
Wow. That must have been real tough times for your grandmother.
Yeah, it was.
When they came to Louisville, do you know if they found they found the community inviting, or did they face any?
Oh, I'm sure they did, because they had my mother. Well, that was after my grandfather. I don't know. Grandma and Grandpa, my great grandmother, and my grandfather moved to Louisville then and lived on Front Street. And Grandpa always had good things to say about Louisville, so I think it must have been very inviting for him.
And then you say they lived on Front Street.
Mm-hmm.
Where at?
Right down by the railroad tracks, in the 1100 block.
Okay. Do you have any memories of your great grandparents?
No.
So they weren't alive when you were born?
No,
they were just
no.
Small.
Right.
And how much time did you get to spend with your grandparents?
Oh, with my grandma and grandpa Jordanelli, I lived with them. And so I lost a father, but I gained a father by moving in with my grandparents. And then a year after we lived here, my grandmother died of a stroke. So then it was just my grandpa and my mother and me, my brother. But my brother strangely enough, didn't move in or sleep in the house that I did. The house that we're in right now was my aunt and uncle, Jaco, Eliso Jaco, who owned the store, which is now the museum. Mm-hmm. And their son had gotten married. And so Dick, when we moved to Louisville, Dick came down here in this house and slept. And I slept with my mother, because it was only a 2-bedroom house. And I slept with my mother in my grandma and grandpa's house.
And that's the house that you donated.
Yeah, that's the house that's a museum.
Were you instrumental in and I'm sure you probably were, in Jaco's store becoming the museum?
Yes.
So was that donated also to the city?
No, right after, let's see, I think it was 79 that John Waschak was mayor then, and I had discussed having something to do with history. I didn't care what it was, but I thought we needed to preserve the history of Louisville. So I talked with John, and he and I decided that he would have a commission. So he appointed, I think it was 8 members to the commission, and it took off from there. Then we got word that the Tomeos wanted to sell that whole corner. And so we went to the city and asked if they would buy it so that we could preserve the Tomeo house and the store. And that was before the Jordanelli house was moved, which they did for $100. No, $20,000. That's what it was. I'm sorry, $20,000.
I was going to say, wow.
Yeah, for $20,000, providing that we kept the house for a museum and the store for a museum.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, and then we paid the city $1 to lease the stuff from them.
So the Tomeos actually owned the whole corner.
Yeah.
So they owned the land that your
Yes.
grandfather's store was on.
Yeah, they own the Jaco store, the Tomeo house. I think there's 4 lots there, and then up to the alley. They owned that portion, and that's what the city bought.
Wow, for $20,000.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're very rich because of it.
Yes, yes, we are.
And for the people who developed it and worked so hard. And I imagine you were one of the original commissioners.
Yes, I was.
Do you remember the rest of who was on?
I really don't. I remember a few of them. Dave Stahl and Carolyn Conroe and let's see. Oh, he was the realtor. What's his name? With
Wasn't Emba? It wasn't Emba.
with Remax. What the heck was his name? I can't think of it. But those are the only ones I can remember being on it.
Okay. Well, we'll go back to that later because I want to find out how much work that was.
Oh, okay.
Putting all that together.
Okay.
Well, you said that your grandmother died shortly after you moved here, so one of my questions was, did you ever learn any of the handwork from the old country?
I did not. And to this day, I don't know which side to use a needle on.
What about aunts and uncles?
Oh, that was great. I had my grandfather lived on Lafarge, the corner of 1100 Lafarge, and then across the alley, his daughter, and Jaco, and we called him Professor Alicio Jaco, who owned the store.
Outside. So let's go back and talk about, I think we were talking about aunts and uncles.
We were.
Okay. So
Okay.
we can pick up from there.
All right. So I started to tell you that my aunt and uncle owned the house that I live in right now. They built it in 1929, and it was built by people actually who owed him bills for his groceries that they had charged in the store. And they hired a carpenter, but I mean, the rest of it was people that worked off some of their bills in the store by building this house, helping them build this house. And then next door was Frank and Kate Jaco, and she was my aunt, and she was my mother's sister. She and Ann were my mother's sisters, and Frank, that lived next door, and Alicio, my uncle Professor, which everyone called them because they were musicians, were brothers. So sisters marry brothers. And they were the two men were in the original band in Louisville that had concerts down at the ballpark. And
so what instruments did they play?
Uncle Frank played the trumpet, and I'm not sure what other, because he played in the symphony orchestra in Denver.
Oh, wow.
And then Uncle Professor played, I think, the tuba and the trombone.
How many people were in that band? Do you know? I mean,
I don't know.
You ever going down and watching them? Or?
No, I don't.
Was this before?
Before, I think it was before we moved. Yeah, here.
Okay. So were these the Jacos or were these the Giardinellis?
They were the Jacos.
The Jacos. I've heard about the band before, but this is the first time I've heard of people that were in the band.
Yeah.
And so they played at the ballpark and probably for maybe the different holidays.
Yes, they did. They did. And like I say, Uncle Professor then owned the store, but my Uncle Frank played in the symphony orchestra in Denver, and they would also play at City Park during the summer in the band shell by the lake there. Now I remember that. We used to go down with him. He had a little coupe, and my aunt, and him, he would drive, my aunt, my mother, and I would sit on my mother's lap. And we'd go clear to City Park in that little car.
Did it feel like you were traveling out of state?
Oh, it took forever.
Yes.
Forever and ever.
I remember trips to Denver, and it was like, are we ever going to get there?
I know.
Took a nap in between.
And yeah, well, we had, all my father's relations were in Denver. So I did a lot of traveling back and forth and spent summers with them and that sort of thing. But then also, when my dad was still alive, I spent summers here with my grandparents. So when my dad died, it really wasn't a great adjustment for me because I knew all the kids in the neighborhood and I had played with them and so forth. So it wasn't like, the only thing that was strange was going to school. And because I didn't know the kids in the school because they were my neighbor kids.
And was that the Catholic school or the public?
No, the public school.
So you went to the public school.
I went to the public school, and my brother did too.
So at that young age, who were some of those friends?
Oh, well, Shirley Thompson Faraci and Darlene LeGrand Ross and Phyllis Schreider Steinbach and Pat Cedar DiGiacomo, although she became a friend later in high school because she was what we called a Catholicer.
She was.
Yeah, she went to the Catholic school. And Laura Santi LaGrasse. Those were mainly my chums in school.
And so, being your childhood chums, they most likely were your chums all through.
They are. They were. They still are.
That's wonderful. Did I ask you if you knew how your parents met?
Yes, you did, and I didn't know.
Okay. So, traveling back and forth from Denver to Louisville was no big thing for you. Kind of tell us what it was like to grow up in Louisville as a little girl.
Oh, it was wonderful. You could go to your friend's house. Like I would go to Shirley Faraci's or Thompson's house. She lived clear where the school is now, the Louisville Elementary School. And I mean, I'd go after school and play with her. She'd come down and play with me. And there were no qualms. I mean, my mother didn't worry about it. Grandpa didn't worry about it because there was no crimes, like just free run of the city. And if something would have happened, there was always someone who would have known you to protect you.
Very true.
They would know.
So it was kind of a Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer life.
Yeah, it was. It really was. It really was. We'd come home from school and get our ice skates in the winter, and we'd trudge clear up to what was Harper's Lake, and ice skate, and then come home. Sometimes it was dark, through those fields. Nobody worried about it. And you weren't afraid. I wasn't afraid.
I know we never locked our doors. What about you guys? Did you ever lock your doors in Louisville years ago?
You know what? When we were I don't remember when I was little if my grandpa and my mother locked the door, but we left the back door open, but we always locked the front door.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Now you said that your grandparents came here because of the mines.
My grandpa did.
And is that Grandpa Jordanelli?
Jordanelli, yes.
So he worked in the mines.
Yes, oh yes, he did. And a matter of fact, he was on his way to work, getting ready to go to work, when the mine in Monarch Mine exploded. Mm-hmm.
So he was on his way to work. He
just missed it.
Mm-hmm. By a shift or something.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
Wow. So what was his day like? Here he is.
I can remember when he went to work, he always left something in his bucket. I don't care what it was. When he came home from work, there was always something there for me. It would be a piece of apple, a cookie, whatever. But I'd grab his bucket because I knew there was always going to be something in there for me, a treat. And excuse me, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's a history about the miners' buckets. Did you ever have to run and get beer for him?
No, but my mother did.
Your mother did.
My mother tells when she was little how she'd go down the back door to the saloons on Front Street. and get a bucket of beer. Yeah. But no, I didn't have to.
So being raised in Louisville, which it was like being raised kind of on a farm. The lots were big and that, and everybody grew gardens.
Yes.
Did you raise chickens or anything like
My
that?
yes, we had chickens, rabbits. Grandpa had a great big garden because they lived on 4 lots. 2 the house was on, and 2 of the lots he gardened, and he raised corn and lots of peppers and carrots and you name it, on any of the vegetables. And then my grandma would can the tomatoes, but then they also went to the farms out north of Louisville, and most of them were owned by Japanese people, and they would get tomatoes there. And I can remember the big thing, they would put the kettles on, and they did it in the shanty, or the outside house they called it. But my grandparents cooked only in the
The shanty.
shanty.
Even in the wintertime they cooked?
No,
there?
in the
Just
summer.
in
In the summer, to keep the house cool.
And of course, probably on coal stoves or.
On coal stoves, both stoves in the house and in the shanty were coal. And we ate there. We ate in the shanty the whole summer long.
And how describe the shanty? Because we have a shanty on our property too. Describe.
It was just one room.
Just one room.
Just one room with a table and chairs and stove, and then a washing machine.
So
When they got a washer, it was one of those ringer type washing machines, and they washed there, even in the winter.
Even in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
So the heated it, the coal, and that. Well,
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also took a bath in there, and my grandfather, we didn't have to take a bath in a round galvanized tub like most did. He had a rubber tub that was the size of a bathtub, and it folded.
Really?
And then we'd unfold it and fill it with water, and so I was able to take a bath. And then when I wasn't able to, when the water wasn't heated or anything, I always had to. I came down here over to Aunt Kate's and took a bath. So I didn't ever have to take a bath in one of those galvanized tubs.
And apparently you never had to take a bath after somebody else.
No, I didn't.
How fortunate you were.
I bet.
So did they raise chickens? Did we say, you said they
Chickens.
had rabbits. What about
Chickens
eggs?
and rabbits,
Did
or
they
eggs.
sell
Oh
or
yeah,
did
no,
just
no.
eggs for the house?
Eggs for the house, And Grandpa used to pick stuff out of the garden and bring it to everyone in town.
What kind of chores were you responsible for as a little girl?
I hate to say none.
Oh,
I-
you're a princess.
But I was a little princess. My grandfather treated me like a little princess, and of course I had my 2 aunts that lived right across the alley, and there was no other little girl, and they treated me like a little princess. And I have to tell you this story. I loved tap dancing shoes, the shiny patent leather shoes. And I always wanted to be a tap dancer, and I took all kinds of lessons, tap dancing lessons, ballet, the whole bit. But anyway, Grandpa'd say, I need some shoes. And Grandpa'd say, you go down and you ask Mr. Webster at the Hub store to give you some shoes and just charge them to me. But don't you come home with those dancing shoes. And I said, oh, I won't, Grandpa. So I'd get down there and I'd say to Mr. Webster, my grandpa said I could have a pair of shoes, and I can have those tap dancing shoes, but I want to wear them home. Because I knew if I wore them home, they wouldn't take them back. So then I'd tap dance all the way up the street with my patent leather shoes, and I'd get home and my grandpa would look at my shoes and say, I told you not to get those, you little dolly. And then I'd tap dance for him, and he was just pleased as punch.
And he knew that you were going to get them.
He did, I'm sure.
Do you have any other stories about your grandfather that?
No, like I say, he cooked. My mother had to work, excuse me, and my grandma had died, so Grandpa had lunch for me every day when I came home from school, sitting on the table, Then, like little princess, I went back to school and he did the dishes.
How did your brother Richard feel about this?
Well, you know, Dick ate down here with my aunt and uncle a lot.
Did he have chores?
No,
Oh, so okay.
neither of us. We were spoiled little kids.
You spoiled kids. So, did you have family pets?
He did. Dick did. I didn't.
And what was his pet?
He had a dog,
Do you remember the name?
Sandy.
Sandy.
It was a Cocker Spaniel.
So, being a princess, I don't know if you had any hardships. But anyway, that was one of my questions is, what were the hardships of the time?
You know what? I don't remember hardships. I really don't. Because, like I say, I had Grandma and Grandpa and Kate and Aunt Ann and Uncle Professor and Uncle Frank, and Dick and I were the king and queen.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was.
That's a great
It was.
childhood. Can you describe what your house was like?
It was 2-bedroom, no bathroom, a living room, a kitchen, and a dining room, and it had a coal stove in the kitchen, of course, to cook on, and a big coal stove in the living room. And Grandpa used to get up in the middle of the night, about 4 o'clock, and stoke it. That was to put coal on it. They'd stoke it at night. Then he'd get up in the morning and open it up so that I would get up to a warm house.
So you never had to run behind the stove?
No, I didn't have to
warm
run
up?
and get warmed up, no.
Did you have running water
Yes.
and indoor plumbing?
No, not when I was a
You had-
child.
Okay, so you had the famous
We had the
outhouse.
famous outhouse. But then again, I would come down to my aunt's house. They both had indoor plumbing, so I'd go to the bathroom down here if it was daytime.
For you. So your mother cooked on now the cooking was done, did you say, by your grandfather? Because I know you said your mother had to work.
Yeah, well, my mother did cooking too,
Yeah.
yeah, and she cooked on a coal stove.
stove.
But I also cooked on a coal stove when we first got married. So,
Do you think you could still do it today?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
I think so.
Something that you just kind of,
Yeah.
riding a bicycle, I think.
It is.
You know.
I could do it,
Put
yeah.
your hand in the oven if the oven thing doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what were some of your favorite meals that they cooked?
Oh, Grandpa used to cook me in the afternoon when I came home from school, when I came home for lunch. I usually had a piece of steak and
Really?
and potatoes because those were my favorite.
Did they raise a cow?
No.
No cow, okay. So those were your favorites, so you just had
So
those.
he'd fix them for me. I mean, other things too, but those were the things that I got most often because he knew I liked it.
So did anybody in the family make your clothes, or did you get to go to Webster's and buy?
I went to Webster's and when we went to Denver a lot, and I went, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say
I
you
bought-
shop out of town.
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically, your form of transportation probably was just the automobile then, right?
Well, no, we took the train to Denver.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah, and we took a bus to Denver. Those were our main ways of getting to Denver to visit with my relations in Denver.
So the train, let's talk about that train. What was it called? The there was a name for it, the interurban, or
No,
was that it?
that was before my
that
time.
was before your time, okay.
It was just a train, a regular train, and it stopped in Louisville, and then if you went to Boulder, it went to Boulder, and backed out of Boulder. I can remember the train pulling into the station in Boulder, and then it didn't go forward, it backed out and turned around, and then I think it went to Wyoming.
Oh, okay.
So
So, did you do a lot of shopping in Boulder too, or just in Denver?
no, we shopped in Boulder a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you went shopping, kind of describe what Boulder was like back then.
Well,
Compared to-
we didn't go all over Boulder. We just went right downtown on Pearl Street.
So you went to the Pennies and.
Yeah, there was Pennies, and there were a lot of little Brooks and Faubers, and lots of stores downtown. I worked there when I was in high school, my senior year. That was with at Cresses,
Okay. Yeah.
and I worked in the greeting cards department and jewelry. So that was in my senior year.
And how'd you get there?
By car.
By car you drove?
No, I didn't drive. This Wesley Berry took us.
So was there a group of you that worked?
In Boulder, not necessarily there.
But so not so much after school, but maybe on the weekends, is that?
Yeah, weekends in the summer.
And in the summer.
Hmm.
Well, let's go back and let's talk about coal mining a little bit.
Okay.
So how many years did your grandfather work the coal mine?
He after I don't know how many years it was, because after the explosion of the Monarch mine, he retired.
So is that the main mine that he worked in, or did he work in any of the
No,
other
he
mines?
worked in other ones. There was one in Marshall. I don't know the name of it. He worked there, and he worked the highway mine.
And that was out on was that on
42.
42?
Mm-hmm.
What other mines do you remember in the area?
Oh, I remember the Acme,
And where was that at?
or down at the end of Main Street. I think that was the name
Down
of
there
it.
by the Elks?
Yeah.
Was that,
Mm-hmm.
that on that
Mhm,
road there?
mhm,
That was the
yeah.
18? Okay.
Yeah.
And then what about the Black Diamond? You remember that one?
Yeah, I remember going by it. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know anybody that worked there.
Do you remember the mine that was out on 287, like going to Broomfield? Wasn't there a mine out
That was the highway.
That was the highway.
That was the highway.
And then what about the one on 40? Did we discuss that one on 42?
42. That was a Black Diamond. I mean, that was the.
Was that the Black Diamond or the Acme? I don't remember.
No, Acme was
over
down
there,
here.
yeah. That might have been the Black
I don't
And
remember.
then there was one
name
out
of
on,
Yeah, up by.
South Boulder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't remember that one either. Mm-mm.
The Rex and the Hecla.
Yeah, I don't
that's
remember
where they were,
those.
okay. So let's talk about Louisville. Who were your neighbors when you were growing up?
Well, there was Mr. and Mrs. Yanucci.
Now, let me ask you a question, because there's something that I've always wondered about. There was a lady in town, and we called her Mariucci.
That was Mariucci lived in the house right next to the Tomeo house.
Okay, because I was wondering, when you said Mr. and Mrs. Unici, you said maybe that's where Mariucci came from.
No, her name was Mariucci, and we used to tease her to death when we were kids. We'd go down the alley and stick our dolls in a hole she had back there, and she'd be standing there, and she'd come with a stick and try and knock their heads off, and we just really teased her to death.
I wonder why that was.
I don't know.
So, describe her. I always thought she was so interesting to see on the
She
street.
was a little chubby lady. I hate to say this, but very dirty. I don't think she ever washed her hair. And her clothes were very soiled. And, but then that was the times.
That was
You
the
know,
time.
people didn't change their clothes every day like we all do.
Do you know if she lived alone?
She
or-
had a son.
Okay, and you don't know do you know what their name was?
We used to tease her and call her Mariucci Lagab, and I don't know what, but Lagab meant a face like a pig. So
Well, now I know about Mariucci.
that was Mariucci.
Okay, so let's go back to your neighbors again, since
Okay.
it wasn't Mariucci.
No, it wasn't
Oh.
Mariucci. We had, let's see, next to us, I told you, was Yanucci. Of course, my aunt and uncle were our neighbors here across the alley. And across the street was a lady named Kleeneach. And she was a little old lady that she wore 20 skirts, reeked of garlic. She would come to church and nobody could sit by her because she just reeked of garlic.
Do you think she wore it? You know, because back in the day, garlic was the thing that was supposed to.
I don't
ward
know
off.
if she wore it or ate it or cooked with it, but she sure smelled of it. and Zerini, people, none of them had kids except the Rossers that lived a couple doors down from here where we live now.
So that made you even more a princess
Oh yes,
because
because the neighbors liked me too. I don't know why, but they did.
I think you lived a very charmed life.
I did. I didn't have the hardship that a lot of my friends had in school.
Right. Name some of the stores that you remember.
In Louisville?
Louisville. Uh-huh.
Well, of course, there was the Jayco's grocery store because I had to work in that.
We want to talk about that too.
Okay, well then I'll wait till that comes up. And the Hub store, of course. And my mother worked for the telephone company, which was in town.
I was going to ask if that.
Yeah, and let's see, what else was there? Of course, there was a bank, and there was the drugstore.
What was the name of the drugstore at that?
Well, there was Rylett's, was one,
Really?
and that was where the bank, the Chase Bank parking lot is now. There were there was one big building there.
I've never heard of Rylett's.
Yeah,
so
it was
that's
Rylett's
great to
Drugs,
have.
and it had a Coke bar. We got sodas and stuff, but they also had like things that you usually get in a drugstore, but they also had like ribbon and that kind of thing in there. And
Did that become the little store, or was that
no,
later?
right next door to that, in the other part of that building, then was the post office.
Okay.
And
Who were the
but-
proprietors of Rylett's Drug? Do you know?
right, Mr. Rylett. Yeah.
I've never heard that name before.
Really?
All these years.
Yeah.
I've lived there. That's
And then the one down further, on the next block, was Grunkemeyer owned the drugstore there. I think they called it the Bungalow.
the Bungalow Drug. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Or Grunkemeyer.
yeah.
They called it both, yeah.
And
Who was the barber in town?
Tassoni,
So that was during Fiore's.
Fiore's time.
What about the restaurants? What restaurants?
Oh, the Blue Parrot, of course. Later on, the Hacienda was the Hacienda, and Kolachi's, but not when I was married when those two opened. There was the bar, Chiles Bar,
What was
and
that famous for? Chiles?
ice cream cones. We used to go down and get ice cream. And then there were couple of pool halls that I remember, but also my Uncle Frank and my Uncle Professor owned a pool hall at one time.
On Main Street, or what was that?
Theirs was on Main Street.
And what was it called? Do you know?
No, I don't. I just knew that they owned it.
Okay.
And the shoemaker, we had a shoemaker in town, Palillo Shoemaker, that was on front Main Street.
Was that close to Tassone's, or I'm trying to
It was right next to the mortuary.
the mortuary? Okay. And at that time, was it the mortuary?
Yes,
Mr.
it was a mortuary.
Mr. Henning.
Mr. Henning. Yeah, and then there was a filling station. The Ford Garage was on one corner of Main Street and Walnut, and then on the corner of across the street, oh boy, what was the name of that? But it was a filling station also.
What about Dravetsky's?
No, Dravetsky's was where the Ford Garage was.
Okay, that was the Ford.
Yeah, that was owned by Perella before Dravetsky.
Okay.
Rome Perella owned it. He had a Ford dealership in there.
So it's Saturday morning, and Virginia hasn't got anything to do. What would take place?
Oh, let's see. Well, I'd probably get up and Saturday morning and wash my hair and put it in pin curls, put a scarf on it, and if it was summertime, I'd walk downtown, because you always met somebody, your friends or somebody you went to school with downtown, and get ready for church for Sunday morning. That's about it.
That's about it, huh?
Mhm.
Did you go to the Rex?
Oh yes. Oh yes. We went to the show every time the picture changed. We were at the theater.
So, my memory of the Rex was, number one, that's where we got our information on the newsreels about what was going on in the world and that type of thing. What shows did you see? I mean, were there shorts that they had?
You know, the ones that stick in my mind the most are the World War II movies.
Right.
I remember a lot that. Well, and then of course they had a lot of musicals that were real extravaganzas, and but the war movies, they stuck in my mind.
Was the piano still there? Did
No.
somebody still play the piano there?
No.
Okay. Well, all right, so let's talk about, first of all, let's describe going into one of the stores. Maybe the hub. What was the hub?
The hub they had everything. They had clothes, they had shoes, they had bedding, they had Coleman's overalls, because I can remember my grandfather buying overalls down there. They just had about everything that you'd find in only on a smaller scale.
And who owned the hub?
Mr. Webster, Mr. and Mrs. Webster. They owned the hub, and then Mr. Porter, Art Porter, worked for them for years. And then he eventually moved up the street and had a store there.
And what was his store called?
Porter's.
Porter's, okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So basically it was a department store.
Kind of a small-scale department store, yeah.
Yeah, where you could get everything you needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about Jayco's grocery store. Since
Okay.
this was your uncle and you worked there.
Yeah.
Describe what the store was like inside.
It was, well, one room when you walked in the store. That's where all the canned goods were on the shelves, and display cases with the pies and cookies and candy and all that kind of stuff. And their meat counter. Everything was in the front. Then in the back is where they had their meat block, and they would make hamburger. I can remember I had to take all the beef bones and cut all the meat off of them for hamburger. I also had to weigh I don't know how many things of potatoes. They sold potatoes 5 pounds for 25 cents. And so I'd have to weigh them and measure them, and then people come in and order 25 cents worth of potatoes. You'd give them the bag. That's how they ordered them. There was a rocking chair back there that my aunt used to sit in all day long. She'd go help once in a while, and then she'd come back and sit, and I remember that rocking chair so well.
I remember her walking in that chair.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
I'll be darned. Yeah, she had. And anyway, it was a cute little store.
So was it mostly? It was groceries then.
It was all groceries. Yeah, there were no clothing or anything like that. It was just groceries.
So was Mr. Jayco, was he the butcher then? Is he the one?
He was the butcher, and then after World War II, John Ross worked for him as the butcher, and John was prisoner of war, and when he came back, he went to work for my uncle.
And did he work there until the store closed, or?
Yeah, he did.
And when did the store close?
You know, I don't know what year it closed, but it had to be, I would say, in the late 50s, early 60s.
And then it pretty much sat vacant, right?
Yeah, it did. It did. It was
until-
owned by Tomeo. My uncle didn't own the store. He rented it from the Tomeo family.
So that probably had to be quite thrilling for you when the city decided to purchase.
Oh yeah, it was, because there were so many memories.
Tell us about when you were on the commission, so you had to be one of the people to go in there and work on that to prepare it for the museum.
Well,
What was that like?
we started with the house.
Oh, you started with
The
the
first
Tomeo.
the Tomeo House was the first museum we had, and that was the roof was falling down, and the ceilings, and we had to get those pushed back up. The commission worked very hard doing all that. We painted the floors. We did things that were not kosher for museums, believe me. We had all these neat pictures, and we just take a nail and pound it in the wall and hang the picture. And they're still hanging there, on the same nails that we put in.
But that's how things were done back then.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the interesting part of the whole thing, I think, is as soon as people saw that there was a place to put their stuff, or the things that they cherished, they started giving them to the museum. But until that point, we had stuff, but not like after we opened up the house.
Were people resentful of it, or were they happy to have it?
Oh, very happy to have it.
Good.
And very happy to have some place to give the stuff that they had kept for years.
That's great, because it's full of wonderful
Oh, yes.
things
Yes.
from Louisville, from people from Louisville.
It is.
Furnished quite a bit like it was when the Tomeos lived there.
Yeah, it is. We tried to do that. And then after that was open, a few years later, we started on the store.
So who are the we's? Who are the people?
Oh, well, let's see. There was Pat, of course, Cedar, and Bill and Betty Buffo, and
What about Don Ross? Was he involved at that time?
no, he wasn't involved. He was when the store opened,
Okay.
but not when the house was open. I'm trying to think who else was on that committee, on the commission at that time.
Who else was in there hammering nails in the wall with you?
I can't remember. Marion, I think Marion Jr.
Yeah, I think she married him.
and oh boy, I just don't remember.
But basically, people volunteered to come and help with it?
Yeah,
Is that how-
They did. They did. When we opened up the store, we had business people or people with trades help us. They volunteered to help. But when we opened up the house, we just did it. We did it on our own. We didn't have that kind of skilled labor.
Well, what a great idea, and like I said before, how lucky we are. So, when they started on the store, of course, you worked in there.
I did.
I think I read someplace where you saw your name written.
Oh yeah, when they by the telephone, and that's when we took orders, because they used to deliver groceries, and so people would call in their orders and tell you what they wanted. So right there by the telephone, my name was written, and when we were kids, it was like Virginia Times, whoever your boyfriend or whoever you liked at the time, and that was on the wall too.
Did they cut any of that out and save it?
No,
Yeah,
no.
they just covered it up.
Just
huh?
covered it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you have to bag the groceries for the people that, when they ordered? Did they call on the phone and order what they wanted for the weekend or the week or whatever?
Or every day.
Or every day?
We had customers that called every day. And delivered their groceries, and that's where I learned to drive, because Johnny Ross, I was telling you, used to drive. We used to be the driver too of the delivery truck, and he would let me drive. Now I was like 13 years old, but he would let me drive. So that's where I learned. One of the places I learned to drive. I also took driver's ed. I was in the first class that ever had driver's ed in school.
There you go. That's great.
So that's why I'm such a good driver.
Yeah. What other grocery stores were in town?
Oh, there was the Red and White.
And where was that located?
That was located right next. Where? How could I put it? I guess right next to the theater.
Okay.
I was, and
Who were the proprietors? Do you know? Or?
no, I don't. I think maybe Madiette LaSalle. Yeah, I think she was. Yeah, and then there was Smith's store on Lafarge, grocery store, and there was McCorkle grocery store, which was just 2 doors up from the Red and White. And then there was, I think it was called Rosenbaum's, and it was next to in that, what the heck's the name of that? Black Diamond, next to the Black Diamond.
The Black Diamond, which was that?
Well,
where the Black Diamond is now?
No.
Oh, I mean, well, where the melting pot is now?
Yes,
Yeah,
where,
okay, so
yeah,
it's next to that.
right next door to that. There was an empty lot between those two buildings till they built on to the melting pot.
So was City Market here at that time too?
Mm-hmm.
And Dalby's?
Yes.
A lot of grocery stores.
Yeah, they had a lot of grocery
stores.
A lot of grocery
So
stores.
there was a big competition. There had to be a lot of competition.
Yeah,
for
yeah. And the sad part of it was, like with my uncle, is people charged their groceries. And he would, and then they'd come in and they'd say to him, "Would you start a new bill for me?" And so he'd tie those, all the stuff that they bought before for months, he'd tie those and he'd put them back in the back of the register, and they never ever paid those bills. When we bought this house, we cleaned out the top of the garage, and there were boxes and boxes and boxes of bills that no one had ever paid. My uncle died a poor man. He could have been a millionaire with all that money. And when one of the stipulations when he died in his will was that his son did not collect the money for those groceries.
That's a fantastic story. And it tells of what the merchants of Louisville were, because the other grocery stores also charged.
Yes, they did.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everybody, you know, because that's basically how you did it until the mines opened up again.
Well, I said to Uncle Professor one time, somebody owed him a bill of like $100, say, I don't remember. And they came in and paid $50 on their bill, and then charged $50 worth of groceries. And I said to him, "What did you accomplish today?" And he would just brush it off. And he died a very poor man.
I often wonder about how they did make it. How the grocers, well, all of them, you know, anybody that owned the store, because they did carry the people.
I know it.
So how did they, you know, how did they survive and keep their stores open?
I don't know, because I know that there were times that he had ordered canned goods, and they brought them in from Denver, and he didn't have the money to pay him.
So did the Denver stores then carry him?
Yeah, they did. They did.
It's just interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Who eventually got paid, you know?
It's
Unless there was enough people in town that were able
Oh, there
to
were a
pay.
lot of people that were
able to
very,
pay.
yeah,
That helped.
very conscientious. But I know that my uncle put, I don't know how many kids through school,
Yeah.
through college.
Good people. Yeah. So, what activities do you remember that took place in Louisville when you were young? I know Labor Day's always been a big
Yeah.
draw in that. So, talk about some of the different celebrations in town when you were a kid.
Well, you know, I can only remember Labor Day and the parade. They had a kids' parade, and I'm not sure if it was on Labor Day or 4th of July weekend. But it was a big kids' parade, because I can remember taking leaves off the catalpa tree that my uncle and aunt had and sewing them on a pair of shorts. These great big leaves, so that we looked like Hawaiian girls.
So that's what you
So that's what we tried to accomplish. And we really didn't have any parks. The ballpark, you'd go down there. that's about all I can remember.
What about Memorial Day? Was there a special?
Well, yeah, there was always a Memorial Day parade. Yeah, there was.
Tell me about that parade.
I don't remember it
Did you
that
ever
much.
march in it?
No, but my mother did, because she was a Red Cross worker or something.
And what did they sell? The ladies for Memorial
Oh,
Day
the poppies, the red poppies.
for the veterans,
Mhm,
to raise money for the veterans.
Mhm.
I remember that as that
Yeah.
was a real biggie.
And then they had, I can remember they had red and white carnations. And I think if your son, if anybody had died in the service, you had a white one. The rest wore a red one. You remember that?
I do remember that now that you're talking about that. So because that signified,
Yeah.
that white carnation signified that you lost them.
Yes,
in the war.
yeah.
That's
And they did the same thing on Mother's Day.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. If your mother was dead, you wore a white carnation, and if your mother was not, they wore a red.
The traditions of a town.
Yeah, isn't that
It's
something?
just wonderful.
Small town.
Small town traditions. So what about Labor Day? What about Labor Day when you were a little girl compared to Labor Day when you were a teenager?
Oh, well, little girl, I just remember going down and riding the rides. But as a teenager, I remember going down and hoping that they would haze the freshmen, and when I was a freshman, and then wanted to do it when I was a senior. And then on the last night of Labor Day celebration, they had a big street dance right in the middle of Pine and Main. They blocked it off and had a band, and it was all the kids. We all danced until, I don't know, 10 o'clock. We had to go to school the next day, but it was great. It was fun.
Were there a lot of problems on Labor Day, or?
I don't remember any problems when I was a kid. No.
Just
A few little drunks around, but
What about?
they didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah. Any gambling?
I didn't realize that there probably was. I don't remember it, but I'm sure there was gambling going on at the pool halls.
What do you remember? One of the events that I kind of remember is the tug of war.
Oh, yes. Oh, they used to have the games in the street, and one of the games they had was eat crackers and see who could whistle the first time. Well,
I never heard of that one.
yeah, we'd have to eat crackers, and the first one to whistle got a prize. Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to whistle, like that, and real loud, and so I won the prize every year because I could whistle real quick with those crackers in my mouth.
What were some of the other games they played?
Kick the shoe.
Because it was just down, old-fashioned, down.
Right.
Fun. So
They played kick shoe. Whoever kicked it the furthest got a prize.
And what about three-legged? I think they have three-legged, or gunny sack races. Didn't they have gunny sack races?
I remember three-legged races.
There's three-legged races.
I don't remember the gunny sack, but they might have.
Yeah. And then the big ending of the games, I think, was when the firemen and the, who was it? The firemen.
And the policeman had the
policemen
tug of
and
war.
the
Was
farmers?
it?
Was it the firemen and the farmers, or who was in that tug of war?
I think you're right. I think it was the firemen and the farmers.
Because
I think
always know
so.
that was a big.
Yeah,
that
a
was
big tug of war.
Tug of war.
Yeah.
That was so much fun.
Yeah.
So, is there a favorite memory of your youth in Louisville that you can tell us about?
Favorite memory? No, not as a little kid. I have a lot of memories of high school, but I don't know.
What is your earliest childhood memory? Can you do that?
My dad dying
Your dad.
and having to move. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be one that would
Mm-hmm.
certainly stick in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, in all, I guess you'd say growing up in Louisville was a happy time for you.
Oh, happiest time. Still is.
Would you change any of it?
No, I wouldn't. Not a thing. I wouldn't change the way it was. I wouldn't change the growth.
That's great. Okay, well, we're about the end of tape 1.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and close this off and take a little break, and you feel like
Good.
we can go on and do another?
Sure.
Okay.